Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is the Byte Show. And it's a real blessing to have Joseph P. Farrell with us tonight. And as many of you know, Joseph P. Farrell, he is a brilliantly gifted researcher and a prolific author. He holds a doctorate in patristics from the University of Oxford. He has published 4 previous works that were all concerning theology. He recently moved back to his home state of South Dakota, where he pursues research on his other loves and hobbies, classical music. He is an organist. He plays the harpsichord, and Joseph P. Farrell is a true composer of classical music. He loves physics, alternative history, and science, and just all-around strange stuff. He is an out-of-the-box thinker and absolutely brilliant. We have worked on a long series with Joseph called Cosmic War. That's available on the Byte Show website. Go to the library, look for Joseph P. Farrell's name, click on it, and his special page at the Byte Show opens up. And folks, it is really rare to have someone of this caliber make these kinds of works, this level of research available. So I'm asking all the listeners to please make use of the PayPal button on Joseph's site. We need to support Joseph P. Farrell and the work that he's doing. And for heaven's sakes, get his books. And we'll talk about that as we go along. Go to Giza, G-I-Z-A, GizaDeathStar.com. And you work out that PayPal button there on Joseph's site. You help this man. We've got to keep him going. Anyway, we are going to be talking tonight about Joseph's new book, Nazi International. And this is, Joseph, this is one heck of a work. Wow. That's, were the Nazis ever really defeated? How far back does this Nazi ideology go in our human history?
Well, thanks for having me back on, Georgianne. Pleasure to be here. That's a good question. If you look at what the Nazis are in terms of what they believe, you total it all up. You get a genocidal ideology.
Yeah.
That is race-based to a certain extent. I would also argue that you could make a case that it is religion-based to a certain extent, because if you read what the Nazis were ultimately going to do as far as Christianity is concerned, it was almost equally as abominable as what they were doing to the Jews. So, you have those two components. You have another very interesting component in certain segments within the SS, usually at a very high level, believe it or not, that would maintain that the Aryan race, basically the white Caucasian race, came ultimately from elsewhere. In other words, wasn't indigenous to this planet at all. And that was the motivation behind some of Reichsfuhrer Himmler's sponsoring of expeditions to various places around the world, Tibet and Brazil and places like that. But if you look at this ideology very carefully, you'll see that, its earliest roots are, in fact, in the pre-Christian classical era, several thousands of years before Christ. If you examine some of the tenets within the Old Testament, you'll find traces of this ideology. If you look at some of the Sumerian texts, even some of the Egyptian texts, which is kind of unusual, but you find this thing going on. You certainly find it going on in the Vedas, and even if you dig long and hard enough, you'll find similar legends and ideas in China and Japan. So, it's a very, very old doctrine. But in terms of how far back organizationally it goes, I think you do have a certain tendency toward it as early as the Holy Roman Empire, with the whole establishment of the Teutonic Knights and other such things. And then, of course, as far as the modern antecedents to the Nazi Party go, you have the Thule Gesellschaft, or as people often mispronounce it, the Thule Society. It drives me nuts when people go to German and butcher the language, but it's the Thule Society. But you have those types of doctrines percolating in the esoteric underground in Austria and Germany after World War I, certainly. So the Nazi Party has its ideological antecedents, and as far as I'm concerned, its organizational ones as well, and it lies precisely in those secret societies. But it's a good question. It's been around for a very, very long time.
Well, it seems to me, Joseph, when we look at what the Nazis were doing in Nazi Germany and the kind of companies that they owned and ran,
right.
Everything that is considered big industry today
right.
is an outgrowth of that.
Well, in a certain sense, yes. We talked before the program began briefly about this, but I think if you look at the policies that the current global elite are putting into place in this country, in Canada and Europe and so on and so forth, I think you can certainly clearly see the fascist tendency in the goal for a completely managed, totally compliant and subservient and slave or serf class to this very small elite sitting at the top. Certainly that's part of it. The what I like to call the pharmatization of society is certainly, a part of it, and certainly find that in Nazi Germany. You even have this concern for the environment, which incidentally, the Nazis were just real big on, taking care of animals and curing cancer and at one and the same time, murdering mentally ill people or Jews or anybody that came on their hit list. So, you've got this insanity at the top that is very similar. But there's one thing I think we have to avoid, and I'm going to take issue with some of my friends, actually, in this field of research that view this global elite as a kind of a monolithic, omnicompetent, infallible entity, whose plans are always destined to succeed, and to quote the Borg phrase, resistance is futile. I don't view it that way at all, because I think what really happens at the end of the war is you have two major factions getting together and basically deciding they're going to coexist and cooperate for a common purpose. But, the closer that they get to their goal, ultimately, human nature being what it is, they will ultimately call an end to that détente, and one or the other of these various factions is going to try and become the dominant one. So, it's to me, it's a program that ultimately is going to fail because of just the inherent problems within it. They cannot, try as they might, they cannot stamp out human nature, for one thing, and for the other, they cannot stamp out the various cultures that have arisen with all that much ease. They can kind of paper over them and try and stamp these things out by fiat and by law, but ultimately those things, as previous empires have shown, ultimately prove futile as well. So, I take issue because I think what we're looking at now in the last decade or so is the gradual breaking down of that post-war détente, as I like to call it, and these factions are increasingly showing signs that they're battling each other quietly and surreptitiously under the surface.
Well, I think it was meaningful that they're worried when somebody like a Rothschild has a news release.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not following. What?
Yeah. Well, they get. I think they're worried about things. The public perceptions. And they put out these news articles one of the Rothschilds recently did.
Oh, Sir Evelyn Durand. I follow you. Yes.
Yeah.
I think you're the one that sent me that, and he's making noises in the news release like what's happening now as a result of just a financial. Privatized financial market just run amok without regulation or oversight, and we've all been wrong, and now we've all got to tighten our belt. Well, there's two ways of reading that. Number one, he's sincere, and they've learned the folly of their ways, and now we've got to do something about it. Mm-hmm. Or number one, he's insincere, or pardon me, number two, he's insincere, and all of this is just big propaganda to get everybody else to tighten their belt while the rich fat cats at the top continue to live like parasites off the labor and markets and economies of the countries that they control and influence.
Yeah, I vote for number two.
Well, I'm kind of somewhere in between. Because if, as I say, this détente is breaking down, then that London-based element of the Anglo-American corporate elite would be genuinely panicked. So, time will tell, but, that's my reading of the situation.
Well, I would think that this situation with the global economic meltdown is directly related to this, what would you call them, Joseph? Cartels? Elite cartels?
No. What you have at the top is basically a agreed upon goal and a basically agreed upon method. The goal is world domination, to make a kind of world government that it basically is a kind of world company, and then thereby to circumvent all the political safeguards that various nations have for the rights and well-being of their people. Okay, because in a corporate situation, you're simply an employee, a wage slave.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be concerned about rights and so on and so forth. So I think that's the ultimate goal. And they're agreed upon the basic method, and the method is simply to so intertwine national economies into private hands, especially the money and credit-creating power, that they can, with patience and enough time, eventually put themselves into that position. Okay, that's what they're all agreed upon. But by the nature of the case, you are dealing with areas of the world that have different resources, that have different cultures, and therefore styles and mechanisms and methods of exchange. You have different needs that those cultures perforce inevitably place on you, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So as a result of that, any factions coming to the table, to this global conspirators' table, with their own sort of national or regional interests in play, are going inevitably to create conflicts with other factions. This is my point. And after World War II, you had essentially two major factions that came to that conspirators' table. You had the Europeans, you had the North Americans. And they struck a détente. Okay, that we're going to cooperate for everybody's benefit here. And the big threat, of course, that they were cooperating for was precisely the Soviet Union, that was not a part of this, a part of this game, and was perceived as having, the same goals, but they were not under anyone's control, and therefore a wild card, present a united common front. But that détente, we've talked off the air as to who the actual players were.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention it here,
right,
because I'm writing another book, and it deals with a lot of very interesting subjects, let's put it that way. It's going to be my most difficult book that I've written yet to date in terms of trying to organize and pull things together, because I'm pulling a lot together in this book. And its focus really isn't even on modern times at all. It's on ancient ones. But in any case, you have this détente, and as a result of this détente, certain things were put into play that they all had common goals. But my point is, in the last decade or so, that is showing distinct signs of breaking down. And you have to know what to look for, and sometimes the clues are very major, and oftentimes they're not. They're very subtle. To me, one of the most subtle ones and missed clues is I keep going back to the Baghdad museum looting in Iraq, which everybody thinks was an inside job by America, or at least American-based entities. I do not think that at all. Because, you have to stitch these dots together very carefully.
Yes.
The Allies, the United States and Britain, kicked out the French and German archaeological teams, basically said, we're coming in, you better get out, unless you want to have bombs falling on you. The next thing we know is that the museum's being looted and the media is being told American soldiers were seen going in and out of the museum carrying stuff, okay? Well, guess whose media broke the story?
Who?
Germany.
Oh. I would have thought that it would have been British or U.S.
No, it was German media.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Now, to me this is a real clue, because the heaviest on-the-ground human intelligence presence in Iraq is not the CIA, it's the German Bundesnachrichtendienst. And, it's a very easy matter to put somebody in someone else's uniforms and parade them around and have people see them doing things. It's a, typical false flag operation.
Right.
So, to me, if you add all the clues up, there are these little signs that there's this covert little struggle going on behind the scenes between the two factions that struck the deal at the end of World War II. And that things are now beginning to drift apart. And to me, it's very interesting that the biggest sign that people miss, that is the sign that this is happening, is the fact that, for so many years after World War II, you may recall Prime Minister Macmillan coming and talking to President Kennedy, and they both gave these glowing press conferences in London or Washington about, the special relationship that existed between the United States and the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it interesting that the United Kingdom is now thoroughly being integrated into the European Union? And you would think that if anything were the case, if this special relationship were all that important in terms of culture, common language, more or less the same legal tradition and so on, that it would have been easier, in a certain sense, to do so in terms of a North American Union. But that's not what happened. So in other words, that to me is a sign that somewhere along the way, between the early 1960s and now, the one faction won out over the other, and the United Kingdom was taken away from one elite and added to that of another. You see? And caught in the middle, in a certain sense, in this factional infighting, is the lovely Rothschild family, the bankers to England and most of Europe, because, now they're having to kind of sit on the fence. And maybe that is another third motivation for his very peculiar remarks. These are sort of the last sorts of things you'd expect to hear from anyone that's a member of that family. But, a few years back, there was a member of the Rothschild family that was found mysteriously suicided, and that makes you wonder.
Yeah, in the bathroom with the belt from his bathrobe.
It's just, it makes you wonder just exactly who's calling what shots here, and I have my misgivings that things are entirely going the way that the Anglo-American corporate elite wants them to go. I just don't see that they are.
This is sort of an off-the-wall question. Does any of this infighting have to do with the murder of Princess Diana?
Well, that's something I've never investigated, to be honest with you. But, and it's such a complex topic because most people don't realize exactly how powerful the British royal family really is.
Yeah.
They are extremely powerful. And they don't realize exactly how much power the English Constitution still reposes in the Crown. It's true, they don't exercise much of it, but they could if they so chose, it wasn't until 1870, for example, that the Crown finally lost all last vestiges to create and regulate the monetary value of English money.
Huh.
So, this is very late comparatively in history. So, if you look at that and look at her death, I certainly think that there's something extraordinarily suspicious about it. Okay, let me put it that way.
Okay.
But as to what it was and who might have been behind it, that's anybody's guess, and I certainly haven't researched enough to take a stab at it.
Okay. Well, I just threw that out on the table.
No, sure, I understand.
I'm just curious. Joseph, we're told in World War II, the end of the war, we're saying, oh, America won the war. Yeah, what a joke. I mean, please get into that and explain what really happened.
Well, we've been, over several sessions, we've kind of given certain pieces of the story, but let's try and sum it up in a tidy package.
Oh, good.
As a result of, quote-unquote, winning the war, one operational branch of the CIA, the on-the-ground intelligence inside the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, was run by Nazis.
Yeah.
One department of the government, called the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, by the time of the Apollo landings, were landing Apollo missions on anniversaries of Hitler's birthday, or with Apollo 11, and this is one that even Richard Hoagland missed, we're landing it on July 20th, 1969, the 25th anniversary of the bomb plot attempt against Adolf Hitler in 1944, and Tom Cruise is making a movie about that, So, we have, in other words, another important branch, department of the U.S. government, being significantly influenced by the Nazis. We have General Walter Dornberger, who was von Braun's army boss in Nazi Germany, becoming a vice president for Bell Aerospace, and that's always been kind of a peripheral story on the sidelines of the Kennedy assassination. We have the whole Nazi International survival thing that I get into in the latest book that, it's just kind of when you sit right down and read all of it, you think, my God, it's just too big, and it really is. So, did we really win? Well, you have to kind of define winning here, because if winning means smashing and crushing your victors into non-existence, no, because basically they seeded so much technology into this country, and some of it by deliberate design.
Right.
And that's the other part of the story that I try and make very clear in the Nazi International and the other books, is that you have more or less an even division of the technological spoils between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the best stuff, namely the Bell and its allied projects, that they keep to themselves.
Yeah.
So in other words, they're fueling the arms race. They've got their own intelligence agents in place so that they're the ones giving us estimates of Soviet military capabilities and intentions in the immediate post-war period. And so what happens? Well, we'd better rearm Germany and build up all of this armament. And what are they telling the Soviet Union? Probably the same thing. So they get us into this arms race that bankrupts Russia and nearly bankrupts us if it didn't, in terms of practical long-term considerations. So, winning is a very unusual word here in this sense, because the entity that we're really fighting is this, for all intents and purposes, secret society that became the Nazi Party, that took over a major power of the world and went on this rampage. And in order to put down that secret society, well, we have to put down that major power. We put down the major power, but what happens to the secret society? Well, it goes underground again.
Yeah, it pops up in America.
Yeah, it pops up here, pops up in Latin America,
right.
Pops up in Egypt, and just about every other place you can think of.
Oh my goodness.
So to me, increasingly, it looks very dubious as to the real outcome of World War II. It's just like, Germany couldn't go any further, but So that certainly closed down that side of the war, and then finally the Japanese surrendered, and that shut down the other side. But the ideology and the organization that spawned it all, as I try and make I think, a fairly convincing case in the Nazi International, that more or less survived.
Yeah. Well, I'm very sure that it survived. And we're seeing the heads of it today.
Yes.
Like the Hydra, you know?
Yeah, that's my point. We are seeing, and to tie it back into my remarks on the détente, that's what we're seeing in terms of what I mean by this breakdown. Granted, you have fascists at the top, but there are North American fascists and European fascists, and the struggle now is for who is going to be the dominant player, so to speak. Yeah. And I don't think our side's holding up too well right now, if we want to call them our side.
Yeah, I agree with you. This financial world meltdown is like a weapon that they're using.
Yeah.
And they are killing so many people, Joseph, millions of people.
Yes.
It's satanic what they're doing.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the spiritual component,
yes.
and there's no doubt that what we're seeing now is just evil beyond anything, and I don't think we've seen the end of it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, isn't this what Scripture calls, the war between good and evil?
Well, yes. I mean, and again, my whole point was stressing the antiquity of some of these ideas is it's been going on for a very long time.
Well, okay. This is what gets me, Joseph. Yes, it has been going on for thousands of years. Why is it that the people never catch on?
Well, the problem is always that, at least in this country and Canada to a lesser extent, we have been so taught from the day that we first enter elementary school to, the present, that any idea of a conspiracy of anything, it's hard enough to sell people on just JFK.
Yeah.
But, to reach out and encompass other matters, the assassination of President Lincoln, the collapse of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International back in the late 80s and so on, to get them to think beyond what they're told on TV and to question, particularly in terms of physics evidence. This is what boggles my mind. As a 6-year-old child, I knew that the magic bullet idea was nonsense, and it still remains so, and I don't care what glitzy demonstrations they do on the History Channel or with computer graphics and what have you, and they're pumping this stuff out, I've noticed in the last couple of years, just almost at an unbelievable rate to convince people, well, JFK was just the lone nut Lee Harvey Oswald and nothing else was involved. Well, why are they so panicked?
Exactly. Good point. Oh, yeah.
So, my point is that we in this culture and in North America have just been kind of ingrained to have it, to have the idea that, conspiracies of this magnitude are impossible to pull off, and they never happen, it's just a bunch of hokum. And as I write in one of the books, I think it was Nazi International, in fact, by the converse token, Europeans have made conspiracy theories a cottage industry. You can go to France and Paris and find any number of bookshops that do nothing but specialize in it. So it's a very different world over there in terms of these things, and it's largely because they're not stupid. They've had a long history of conflict and manipulation and so on and so forth. So they know better. So they intend inherently to be more cynical than we do. But I think, now the climate has so changed that, we have the official 9/11 conspiracy story. So, even the government's on board.
Yeah.
So I think a large part of it is just the credulity of people. They don't stop and turn the volume down on TV and just look with their eyes and with their mind rather than believe what people tell them to see. And then the second thing is I think people in this country are what I call academicized. In other words, they won't believe a countervailing theory unless an academic with PhD tacked behind their name tells them that, which to me is nonsense.
Right.
Because, God gave us a mind, and we can use it whether or not we have a degree.
Yeah.
But I think people are genuinely of kind of that mentality. They're so trusting in this country, and that's my 2 cents on that. I ponder that many times myself, and that's still the best answer I can come up with.
I know, it does. It just boggles my mind. It just,
Well, part of it, is people are, for the most part, they also just simply want their security. Even if they are inclined to believe things, then they don't want to do anything about it. So they better not look because they might have to. That's the problem.
Well, it's interesting to see fire and paper that doesn't burn.
No comment.
Yeah, no comment. That's all I'm going to say about that one.
That's someone else's show.
Whoa. Oh, my goodness. Well, the Nazi Party was a sort of parallel bureaucracy to the agencies of the German government. And I kind of see that same thing here in our country.
Yes. Yeah, this is a very good point. And it's one I used to make to my Russian history students, is if you look at the way the Communist Party was organized at every level, it had an office that duplicated some office of the actual de facto government, okay? And the same thing certainly with the Nazi Party. It had a party chancery. It had local district and what are called regional or GAO offices and so on and so forth. In other words, it paralleled at virtually every level and in every department, incidentally. It had some parallel structure to the actual Reich government. So in this country, what we have is not only the quote-unquote two political parties with their, district and local leaders and so on and so forth, but more importantly, you have all these foundations and study groups, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Group and all these Rockefeller cabals and so on and so forth. Well, essentially, if you look at some of their structure, they kind of overlap in some instances. But if you look at some of their structures, they do have these weirdly parallel bureaucracy, so that people flow in and out of the private sector in this country, like a revolving door. And it's the same people, And to me, this is part of the other reason that people in this country are. It's not that they don't believe these things. It's just they're so cynical they don't know what to do about it, And you can't really blame them from that standpoint. But, this is the other reason why I think we had difficulty in defining victory in World War II. Because, we can sit a bunch of German generals and admirals down and make them sign a surrender paper. Yeah. But we never get around to having any representative of the Reich government sign a surrender paper. We had Grand Admiral Dönitz. We captured him, put him on trial at Nuremberg. Why didn't we sit him down and said, "Here, sign this"?
Interesting.
You're the president of the Reich. So that there's that little problem, and then the problem of the Nazi Party. There's no representative of that there either.
Exactly.
So we had a little bit of difficulty defining victory there in legal terms.
Yikes.
Yikes.
Oh, my gosh. Well,
and especially, I have a whole chapter in Nazi International that, I've kind of changed my tune about the idea of Hitler surviving because, you have the Allied version and then you have Argentina's version.
Well, how do we know for a fact that he, was killed with Eva Braun?
Well, the problem is that all the people, and this really gets to a fundamental problem, that all the people that say that Martin Bormann or Heinrich Miller or Hitler and Ava, that they're all killing themselves or that they were killed under these circumstances. Well, all the people saying this are Nazis.
Yeah.
So why all of a sudden, having fought this 12-year-long struggle, 6 of it in actual war all over the world, with this barbarous, murderous regime that, we vilified during this whole wartime period as being nothing but a party of liars, why all of a sudden are they believable?
I know.
Part of it's explainable because we needed Hitler to be dead. Okay, after all that treasure and blood and suffering, everybody needed him to be dead. Okay, so that's certainly understandable. I'm not saying that it isn't, but behind the scenes, you have all of these conversations between Joseph Stalin and Harry Hopkins and Churchill and Truman taking place, and even these as I reduplicate in the book, these communications between Truman and Justice Jackson, to investigate the existence of Martin Bormann in South America, through the FBI. Yeah. And to me, that's a dead giveaway right there that they know something is wrong, because Truman has already signed the National Security Act into law when that request comes from Justice Jackson. And that law states that the CIA has jurisdiction in foreign intelligence matters. And the FBI basically is to take over counterintelligence inside this country. Right? Yeah. So why does Truman decide, okay, this is a good idea, we'll have the FBI look into it? It's like he knows he can't trust the CIA. Why? Because Dulles struck that deal with the Nazi general, to make the Soviet desk essentially nothing but a front for a house of Nazi spies.
Yes, exactly.
So, it's just like, whoa, we've got some serious problems here. We better take care of it.
I know you can't even, it's hard to even begin to imagine this stuff.
Oh, I know.
But the problem is it's real.
Oh, I know. That's this is precisely my problem. When I was writing the book, Georgianne, I thought, geez, you can't be serious, Farrell. This is like a really bad Hollywood movie. You can't be serious. But yes, the sad fact is, if you connect the dots in the way that I do, just the Bormann escape scenario alone is mind-boggling for its deviousness. And once you know the character of Martin Bormann, the way he gets out of there, it has his signature all over it. But when you look at the scope of it, $800 million just in Argentina. It's no wonder they strike this little détente, because that's a heck of a lot of money. So. The criminality of it just boggles the mind, and it to me, it's the indicator that I used to think things began to go wrong in this country with the JFK assassination, but I more and more come to the conclusion that it was all of these deals with the devil that we made at the end of World War II. Because since then, poor Eisenhower, and I think this to this day, when he talked about the military-industrial complex as he's leaving office, I don't think he meant ours at all. Wow. I think he meant the Nazis and their infiltration into key bureaus and agencies of this country. Because one of his sternest warnings was that it would have a spiritually corrupting influence.
Oh boy, it has had that.
Oh, yeah. No doubt there.
Whoa. And that's about 2 or 3 dozen shows all by themselves.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is.
That subject, as you know, Joseph, is so huge and so deep. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Well, when when did the Nazis, they have used the Muslims.
Oh, yes.
When did that start, and how did it start?
Oh, boy, that's such a twisted history. It begins really with the German race laws, Nuremberg race laws, in 1936. The Nazi government got telegrams from all over the Arab world congratulating them on that. And from there, very interestingly, the German, of course, intelligence presence inside Iraq at that time was very heavy. And they were based, incidentally, in Iran. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Iran, do you know what the name Iran means?
Go ahead.
It's Persian or Aryan.
Aryan.
And guess who suggested the name change
The British.
from Persia to Iran? Not the British.
No?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
Germans.
The Germans.
Oh, why am I not surprised? Oh, my goodness.
Or rather, I should say the Nazis.
Yeah.
Okay? So you have this big intelligence presence there in the Middle East prior to and during World War II. And one of the centers of it is in Iraq. And the fellow that the British appoint, a radical Muslim clergyman, to be kind of the senior Muslim clergyman in Jerusalem, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Husseini.
You mean kind of like a Wahhabi?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, he makes his way to Baghdad as the Germans have established this network, and he and the German ambassador conspire to overthrow the British puppet government there. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they do. And, of course, you know the history. The British have to go in and with troops and clean that government out, okay, and restore basically British rule in the country, okay? So al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, decides, well, he's going to seek sanctuary. So where does he go? He goes to Berlin, a nice welcoming place, where he helps organize for the SS Muslim SS volunteers from Bosnia and Kosovo to fight for the Waffen-SS against the Russians, okay? So he's appointed by the SS as kind of the senior Muslim chaplain to all Waffen-SS Muslim units, okay? And from there, at the end of the war, the SS comes to him and offers him an airplane to get out of Germany and back to Egypt. Now, stop and consider this for a moment. Germany doesn't even have much gasoline left at the time, let alone many airplanes to fly somebody all the way to Egypt. So, in other words, this gives you an idea of how high-ranking he is in terms of Nazi schemes and plans for the post-war world. Okay? Well, the Mufti refuses, and he makes his way to Switzerland by means of a car, which he had purchased, and then from Switzerland makes it back to Egypt, okay, where he is present when the West German government makes an arms deal with the newly installed Nasser regime, and we've talked about that before, how the CIA decided to overthrow King Farouk. And so who do they turn for their on-the-ground presence in doing this but good old General Galen?
Yeah.
And who does Galen get to head this up? Well, he gets SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny. So they send a bunch of these SS guys down to Egypt after they get rid of Farouk and install Nasser. And Nasser, of course, turns the training of the Egyptian army over to these Nazis, who also train his intelligence service.
Oh, my God.
And one of the friends that Colonel Skorzeny and an SS general by the name of Farnbacher, one of the good friends they happen to make there in Egypt is, guess who? The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And his cousin, who is Yasser Arafat. So, in other words, you have the SS training all these Wahhabis and Muslim Brotherhood people from, the Egyptian Bana.
Yeah.
You have them training all these people down there in Egypt to go and blow up Israelis in Palestine. So, it's no wonder that we have the mess over there that we do, because part of it is that under the cloak of the CIA, what you really had running all these radical Muslims in the Middle East were a bunch of Nazis. And they're doing so, I can assure you, not out of any loyalty or sense of obligation to the United States or even to the CIA. They're doing it for their own long-term designs and goals.
Yeah. Gee. Oh, Joseph.
And if so much the better if they can embroil the United States in it.
Yeah. That's true. And they're very good at doing that.
Oh yes, absolutely.
They're very crafty.
Absolutely.
Also, there was an Assyriologist, and I don't speak German. It's Friedrich
Delitzsch.
Delitzsch. Okay. He is famous with Kiel for the Bible commentary.
Yeah, the Kyle and Delitzsch Bible commentaries are very, very standard biblical commentaries. They run to several volumes and cost several $100. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one and the same.
Okay. What he gave a speech.
Yeah?
Yeah, that caused a lot of trouble.
Well, he gave a speech in 1902, I think it was, 1901 or 1902, sometime around that point, called Babel und Bibel. In other words, Babel and Bible.
Yeah.
Okay? And later it was published, actually, as a little book. And his point, which if you read this thing now, you won't think much of it, okay? But back in Lutheran Imperial Germany, yeah, it's going to cause something of a stir. Because his contention was that in looking at these Assyrian myths and tablets, which he was an expert in, one of the few people in the world that knew this stuff at that time backward and forward, is that you could see the original, that was his contention, the original version of what later becomes some of the, favorite stories in the Old Testament, like the Flood or the Tower of Babel and so on and so forth. And it was his contention, furthermore, that you could, if you did this carefully enough, and he didn't attempt to, but if you did it carefully enough, you might even get some insight into the Old Testament portrayal of its God, Yahweh, okay? In other words, what he was really saying was, this guy may fit somewhere in the Sumerian pantheon.
Yeah.
Okay? So what we may have here in the Old Testament is kind of an edited, for monotheistic audiences only, version of Sumerian myths. Okay? Now, that was really an extraordinary thing to say at the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
And it caused such a stir in Germany, in the Lutheran Church, that Kaiser Wilhelm, who as the German Constitution at that time had it, was also the chief bishop of the Lutheran Church. Well, he had to step in, and quiet everything down, by giving substantial monetary contributions to the Lutheran Church and so on and so forth. So, it caused quite a stir, and finally, the Kaiser was able to get everything quieted back down again. And in the meantime, Delitzsch had published his book, so it was really kind of too late for the Kaiser to try and put the toothpaste back in the tube at that point.
Really?
So,
I'm surprised they didn't burn him at the stake.
Well, yeah. People really just don't have a very good idea of how staunchly Lutheran it really was in that court, for once, Wilhelm, whose public relations skills on the international stage weren't too great, he at least had some skill on the domestic scene.
Oh my gosh. Well, my goodness, we've got this post-war extraterritorial state. Yeah, with the Nazis. What is that all about, Jim?
Well, this is a very interesting thing, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because there are some science fiction novels that were, 3 of them, that were published by a neo-Nazi after the war by the name of Wilhelm Landig, Landig.
Yeah.
And I've actually got these 3 novels, and the reason I didn't cite them directly in the book is that They're about 1,000 pages long, and they're so turgid to read. I mean, you can imagine this neo-Nazi trying to romanticize the Nazi regime. And I just thought, geez, nobody's going to read this stuff. They won't buy my book. They'll just set it down.
Oh, dear.
So what I did was I used Nicholas Goodrich Clark, who has obviously read these same novels and kind of summarized them in a scholarly work that he did, and did so without the turgid and florid prose, in praise of the Nazis. But anyway, if you read these novels, one of them is called Götzen gegen Tula, Godlets against Tula is what the title translates to. But Landig prefaces these novels, particularly that one, with the little phrase at the very front of the book that they are voller Wirklichkeiten, which means full of realities. Mm-hmm. And what he says in the novels is this, that the heroes of the novels get on this U-boat. This is after the war, mind you.
Yeah.
They travel to Canada, where they are picking up the remains of a German research base there, boxing it up on the U-boat and carting it off to South America, where they find hundreds of German scientists and Luftwaffe and SS soldiers and pilots guarding this facility that are continuing their research, which, incidentally, just happens to be on flying saucers.
Oh, how interesting.
How interesting is this? And while the heroes are there in these three novels, they also get to attend a kind of a convention.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a convention. It's a convention of secret societies from the Orient, Muslim brotherhoods, Native American Indians from North and South America who've sent their own brothers there, and so on and so forth. But basically what you have with this convention is kind of an international criminal terrorists syndicate summit, okay?
Yeah, it would make, what's his name, the guy, their favorite boogeyman.
Osama bin Laden.
Yeah,
it would make him green with envy.
Yes.
Green with envy. Because, what you have in the novels is a Nazi-sponsored international summit of secret societies, criminal syndicates, and terrorist groups.
Yeah.
And they're meeting and being orchestrated very clearly by this Nazi supra-state, which he very clearly states is located in Argentina. Well, it's important now to strip away the fantastic elements of Landig's novels and see what he's actually saying, because remember what he said, is these are novels voller Wirklichkeiten, okay? Full of realities.
Yeah.
What he's saying, number one, is that there is an extraterritorial Nazi state in Latin America, okay? And it has an identifiable physical location. It's conducting research. It's being guarded by German personnel, and it's the center of international criminal terrorist activity.
Yeah, well, that is not just supposition.
No, of course not. No. No, that's what the rest of the book is about. It really exists down there.
Yes, it does.
I even put pictures in for you so that you can see it. So you've got this going on, and, the interesting element is, the other thing that Landig makes clear in his novel is that this is serviced by U-boats long after the war, and the point of departure for all these activities as the war was ending and the post-war world was being set up was Norway. Okay? Yeah. Well, if you examine all the history, what you have is Landig is really saying that Bormann had internationalized Nazism, okay, around a solidly German core. In other words, they retained the actual control and influence of these other organizations. And this is precisely what, if you read the historical record, actually happens, because in the 80s, there was kind of a terrorist summit that was held in Barcelona, Spain.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this in the book. And the hosts of it are not only, General Franco's nationalist government there in Spain, but you have the heavy presence of people like Otto Skorzeny, remember him?
Yeah.
And all these Nazis that are kind of sponsoring the event.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
The historical record is very clear that this entity exists, or pardon me, at least at that time existed, but that's 1982.
That's not very long
Yeah, that's
ago.
not very long ago, and that's a long time after the war. So my point is, any hopes of this thing kind of falling apart by disinterest, well, we're tired of playing Nazi now, and we want to go off and have swimming pools and cars and mortgages.
Don't you love it?
Yeah, any idea of that, at least as late as 1982, just isn't there.
Yeah.
These people are very serious. So, the point is that you can trace all of the points that Landig makes in his novels, which are just terribly bad from a literary point of view. And if you look long enough and hard enough, you'll find that every last one of them are, in fact, true. And here's this man in, 1979 and 80 and so on in Austria writing all this stuff and bragging about it. That should tell you something else.
Well, sure.
They want the story to be known. In other words, their position is secure enough that they're no longer threatened by it being known.
But see, a normal person would read that and they'd say, oh, this is like science fiction.
Yeah, exactly.
See, they hide things right in plain sight.
In plain sight.
Yes.
And that's precisely, I think, the reason why Landig's novels are so over the top. They're so nutty that they're just loony, Georgiana. There's no other way to put it. They're so nutty that no one actually taking the time to read all 1,000 pages of one, in German no less, would actually ascribe to them any sense of reality. But the important point, when you read this stuff, you always have to bear one technique in mind. They are deliberately doing that, as you say. It's a technique of disinformation.
Right.
To make you disbelieve the idea is even possible. Mm-hmm. And that's my whole point with the Nazi International. It's not only possible, but you have an organization that is so well organized that it can pull off this thermonuclear research project right under Juan Peron's nose in the middle of nowhere in Argentina, and then close it down with equal impunity when he blows the whistle on it. So, yeah, you put this together with everything I've said in Reich of the Black Sun, SS Brotherhood of the Bell, all this business about Admiral Byrd's expedition to Antarctica, the possibility suggested by the Magic 12 documents that Roswell wasn't an alien crash, it was something Nazi.
Right.
You put all this together, and the fact that they really were investigating field propulsion and free energy and weapons of mass destruction with the Bell device.
Right.
You put all that together, and what Landig is saying is true, but he is the only element really of misdirection is that he's saying, well, look up there in the skies at all these flying saucers.
Yes.
Rather than down here.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
the story is down here, not up there.
Boy, is that true. Well, Joseph, my gosh, these UFO occupants, they speak German, or they speak English with a German accent.
We are from Venus.
Yeah,
Ballet Berlin.
Yeah, we will take care of you. Yeah, we will be back. You are our chosen.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Yeah.
It's just, it's breathtaking on one level, but on another, it's almost comical.
Well, yeah, that's why I laugh so much when I describe it.
Yeah.
Because, again, you would think that you are either listening to a bad radio play from the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
Or watching just this horridly bad Hollywood movie, even worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space, it's just so loony and goofy that people can be this insane, and yet, we're dealing with Nazis here, folks, and they really are that insane.
Yeah. Coast, Joseph.
No, they're not. And, you know, you mentioned the German-speaking UFO occupants. I'm glad you did that.
Yeah.
Because I put a story in there about one of the early UFO contactee people back in the 1950s, very little known now. His name was Reinhold Schmidt. And I put his story in the book for a very simple reason, because he's a fellow, one of the first, in fact, that claimed that he actually took a trip inside UFOs. But as you say, the occupants of the UFOs, and he happened to speak German, so, you know, when he heard them talking, they're all talking in German.
Yeah.
But the really neat thing, as far as I'm concerned, is he's describing all the technology on the inside of this thing.
Yes.
So what's he describing? Well, he's describing buttons and dials, tubes of colored liquid, okay, and then he's describing Arabic and Roman numerals that he sees on some of the equipment.
Yeah.
Now, whoa. And by the way, he also says that the occupants of the UFOs are men, and he thinks they're on some sort of mission from Russia. Okay, so in other words, he doesn't think this thing is extraterrestrial at all. None of the language he uses to describe the occupants, the technology, is remotely extraterrestrial.
Oh.
And the little detail about Arabic and Roman numerals, you know, I don't recall them using those on Mars lately, but, you know.
Exactly. You know, and since when do, quote, end of quote, extraterrestrials need buttons and dials and lights and...
precisely. And colored liquid.
Yeah.
And tubes.
In tubes,
Yeah. The whole thing, in other words, to me, the reason I give it credence is precisely because it doesn't show all the signs of all this advanced technology.
Right.
The reason I give it credence is no one could possibly invent a story that loony.
Yeah.
And, you know, German, flying saucer, you know. But the real reason I give it credence is because the United States Air Force, within, a day, I think it was, of the story even breaking to the local county sheriff, the United States Air Force shows up with two men to debrief him. And when he says, no, I'm not changing my story unless it interferes with the security of the United States, what do? They arrange for him to be thrown in a mental hospital.
Oh, the shades of Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, you know, that to me also tells me something, because why would they not refuse to say, okay, well, Mr. Schmidt, it's a matter of national security then?
Yeah.
Well, the reason is clear, if you think about it. For the Air Force to have done that, to have admitted that, would then place the whole scenario of all of this advanced Nazi technology flying around somewhere out there, and it ain't us doing it, folks. You know, that would have given that story too much credence.
Mm-hmm.
So he has to be shut up another way. So, you know, that's why I think the whole story has some sort of validity to it.
Yeah.
And he's, incidentally, I just used the Reinhold Schmidt story. He's not the only one. You know, there are a couple of other very early UFO reports, 50s and 60s, of people hearing people talking German, you know, of all things. So, you know, why not Swahili or, you know, or Russian or French or something?
I'm telling you, Joseph, there's a lot of people I've heard that, you know, abductees, et cetera, that they're taken aboard and there's these tall, blonde
Nordic types.
Yeah, very, very tall. Taller than 6 feet tall. And they seem to speak in a German dialect.
Yeah, well, remember the story of Betty and Barney Hill. And I mentioned this in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, you recall.
Yeah.
That Barney Hill, you know, his doctor under hypnosis asked Barney, you know, well, what do they look like? And Barney's reply is, well, they look like Nazis. Those are his words, not mine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's very, very weird. And again, it's stories like that kind of make me take Dr. Jacques Vallée's line that, you know, a lot of these UFO abductions appear to be wholly terrestrial military psychological operations of some sort for some reason. We don't know exactly what or why. But, you know, it's all these weird little details that just run so diametrically counter to the whole extraterrestrial hypothesis. And just kind of put everything into perspective again, That's the reason I once again in this book put the affidavit of Dr. Carol Rosen and what she heard from Werner von Braun in the book. Because, if you recall the story, von Braun told her that, the first enemy are going to be the Russians, and then we're going to have to deal with terrorists, and then nations of concern, and then asteroids, and then the final big thing that we've got to be afraid of that the global elite is cooking up for us are aliens, extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
Okay? And I put that in the context of everything I've written in these Nazi books, particularly this last one, and this idea of a continuation of something headquartered in Latin America with a global extension that is very self-evidently continuing lines of independent research of advanced physics. That's the key here. When you put all that into context with what von Braun told Dr. Rosen, it begins to look to me like he's talking about something he didn't necessarily hear from our elite, but it was something that he had heard long ago in Nazi Germany. Because look what you have, Georgianne. We have the whole two space programs hypothesis, that Richard Hoagland and others have talked about and that he's written about recently.
Right.
Okay. You have this whole idea that there is some advanced technology that is being deliberately hidden and used in space, completely off the books and out of the public eye. Okay? Well, if you go back, historically, the origin of both of those technologies is Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Because the rockets are there. That's your public, your early public space program, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then you've got all of these weird things going on in the SS with Victor Schauberger and his bladeless turbines and the bell and all of this stuff. And we don't even know about it, really, until after the war. That's so super secret, we don't even know it exists.
Right.
So I think that's the origin of all of this. There's a deception that's been in the making for a long time.
Yes, that's the point. It has been in the making for a very long time.
Right.
And the culmination of it, Joseph, has got to have something to do, at least in my way of looking at it, it's more than, a phony second coming of Christ.
Well, we've talked about that before, excuse me.
Yes.
But yeah, you can create people's expectations to look at that a certain way.
Yes.
You can manipulate that expectation in a certain way. That's what I think dispensationalism really is. It's a manipulated expectation.
Yeah.
And you can certainly you certainly have the technology, holographic technology and so on, which with the appropriate phase conjugation, you could make atmospheric in nature. So, you can stage any number of things. I'm open to entertain the idea. But, I think they're a long way off from that because of the problem that I suggested earlier is I think that there are signs, and again, I could be wrong. I'm not saying that I'm not holding this dogmatically, but I think there are signs of some serious factional infighting going on.
Oh, yes, I agree.
And, that's the problem. If they're going to pull off something like that, then they have to have all their ducks in a row, and I think some of the ducks are deciding to swim out of the pond.
Yeah. Well, they're not swimming out of the pond out of benevolence.
No, they're certainly not, no.
Oh my gosh, Joseph. Well, we look at things like in Scripture, the Tower of Babel, the tower technology.
Mm-hmm.
God said, if they're allowed to do this, they could do anything.
Right.
So he comes down and he fixes it, the Bible is full of these things that are very curious.
Mm-hmm.
The flaming sword, the revolving sword, all kinds of things that are, I just look at so much through the Scriptures, Joseph, and there's a lot to do with physics and weaponry.
Well, there is.
Yeah, and the terminology they used, at least what it's been the way it's been translated into English, is probably the best they knew how to to describe something they didn't know what it was.
Well, even the same can be said for the original Hebrew.
Yeah.
Well, responding to that is very difficult because, as you know, I deliberately avoid theological issues because there's so much that is involved that and this, I hope this doesn't sound the wrong way. It's not meant to, but there's so much involved that the average layman really doesn't even know exists as problems to be addressed.
True.
But if we for a moment suspend a theological view of those stories,
right?
Okay, what you have, you cite the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
What you have is a monument or a building or a structure of some sort is being erected.
Right.
Which by the biblical statement itself is said that they will be able to do whatsoever they imagine to do.
I know.
Okay, now wait, whoa.
Yeah.
And then God comes down and ruins the project by scrambling languages.
Right.
Okay, that's the basic outline of the story. But you'll notice that there's not really a morality in play. Because what's really of concern is that one party, God, wants to deny the technology to another party, man.
Right.
Okay? So take the symbols, God and man, out of the picture for a moment and take that story and press it back into the Sumerian context where you have a similar thing going on. But the similar thing now is this ancient war between two sides of the same big family tree.
Yeah.
And caught in the middle, if you recall correctly, is mankind himself.
Right.
Okay? So this is why I say there are all sorts of problems, and these may be theological in nature. They may not be. Okay? This is the problem that was suggested by Friedrich Delitzsch.
Yeah.
Because, again, we're looking at stories that appear to be or to have been heavily edited to favor a certain theological party.
Right.
Okay? This is the problem. Now, having said all that, I don't want your listeners to misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the type of interpretation that I have proposed, or even that Delitzsch has proposed, is either correct, historically speaking, and I have not said that I adhere to it theologically or spiritually.
Right.
I'm saying that it is an open possibility, and I'm still working on the problem. Okay?
Yes.
So this is why I, and that's just but one instance of many. This is why I shy away from theological commentary, because it is so extraordinarily subtle here.
Yes.
The bottom line is we may not be looking at the good guys and the bad guys in the biblical account. Or, by the same token, we may not be looking at the good guys and the bad guys in the Sumerian account.
Right.
The story might have to be pieced together from both. It might lie in one or the other. Okay? That is, I think, the most we can say just in terms of dealing with the texts themselves as they stand and not reading into them theological biases and points of view. That's the problem. And it's a big one, incidentally.
Yes,
it's a huge one.
Oh, I didn't mean to put you on.
No. I understand. I understand why you ask it. I'm just trying to throw that cautionary note out to people. Because the reason why, again, is that you do have, in my opinion, an effort being made by the various factions within this global elite to recover that technology. And part and parcel of that recovery, they are going to put out some religious agenda. It may end up being, quote-unquote, biblically based. It may end up being, quote-unquote, pantheistically based. That's my point.
Yeah.
To reconstruct the original good guys and bad guys, if any reconstruction is even necessary, is the problem.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a scholar out there who has any sort of traditional doctrinal leanings that is yet in a position to do that. And I include myself in that category. I certainly include most of the other big-name biblical commentators that you'll hear talking on similar subjects. I could name a few, but I'm not going to. They'd probably be known to most people. But it's an extraordinarily subtle question, Georgianne, and there are so many pitfalls any way one answers it.
Yeah.
If you answer it with theological correctness, then you run into historical problems.
Yeah.
If you answer it with historical correctness, you run into theological problems. And on these problems go. So it's an extraordinarily, I do think in my bones there is a way to reconcile it. But it is not yet in its details. It's not yet apparent to me how to go about doing so. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I defer commentary, other than what I've just said.
Okay. No, I understand. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot on that. The statement that's in Scripture where he said if they can do this, then they'll be able to do anything.
Right.
It just strikes me as being something to do with a technology.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. And note, that's my point.
Yeah.
The response of God there isn't really moral.
Yeah.
It's not a moral response. It's not a moral thing that he's really doing there. You're not given the impression that what they're doing is sin.
Yeah.
And he's going to punish it. The story doesn't read that way. You don't get that sense if you stick to the text itself.
Right.
You have to bring those considerations to the text.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's my problem. So, you can argue for a moral aspect to it simply by its placement in the totality of the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
Okay? But the story itself, if you just kind of snip it out of the book of Genesis, it kind of stands on its own inside the book anyway. And if you read it, you're not told, well, what they're doing is sinful and we're going to go down there and punish it by doing this, which is usually what you get at those kinds of points in the Old Testament. But that's not what you see here.
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
Well, Joseph, with the infighting between these two elite groups,
right?
Who are their enemies aside from each other?
Well, let's look at that from the standpoint of that biblical story.
Okay.
The biblical story is suggesting that mankind as a whole, in other words, if this technology is more or less democratized, okay, then some elite's power is challenged, if you want to read it in that way. Okay? So in other words, what I'm suggesting is these elites throughout history, from modern to ancient times, have done two things. They are looking at or for a technology and a science that they know from other factors, and I won't get into those because that's part of the new book.
Okay.
They know from other factors that science is there. Okay?
Yeah.
The thing that they cannot afford to do if they want to maintain their control is they cannot afford that to get out to the masses.
Yes.
It's just like the dilemma that the elite has now. Let's say, for example, Joe the plumber, in his garage invents the free energy device of the ages, okay, and he's able to power his entire city with it, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And let's say, being a clever man, that he decides not to patent the thing, but to build several of these and give them to his neighbors, and with the request that they build several more.
Yeah.
Okay? So that very quickly you have this technology multiplying. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, the elite's response is, well, their petrodollars are based on oil scarcity.
Yeah.
Okay? Their whole geopolitical world view, their whole economic view is therefore closed. It's a closed system. And anything like that introduced from outside is therefore threatening their entire basis of power, number one.
Yes.
Okay? So they must suppress anything technological or in the theory of physics that would tend to that idea. Okay? And by the same token, they have an altruistic motive, because if you weaponize this stuff,
yes,
you've got something really, really bad.
Oh, yes.
And you've got no real way to control or track the flow of it. For example, the reason why nuclear proliferation efforts concentrate on uranium and plutonium and enrichment facilities is you need those if you're going to make an H-bomb, okay? So there's no real point in tracking who's producing tritium or so on and so forth if they don't have the means to have an A-bomb to set it off.
Yeah.
So they must track the atom bomb and its allied technologies. But with this stuff, with this alternative energy stuff, there's no way to track it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
That's their problem. Okay? So if you go back and look at the Tower of Babel story from the technological point of view, as you suggest,
yeah,
then you have the same sort of dynamic as what I'm suggesting is in play there politically. Okay?
Okay.
That's what you have going on.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. Yeah.
Wow. When you add to this consideration the idea that this, I'm going to toss this out there for people to think about, okay? If you add to this the idea that the money power, the people that have had private hands on the creation and valuation of units of exchange and instruments of credit, okay? If you add to what I just told you, the idea that that money power has been more or less a continuous and uninterrupted power throughout history, from those ancient times till modern ones, then you've got a huge story.
Wow.
Wow. This is why you see the struggle in the Middle Ages between those groups that do have that monopoly power and the crowned heads of Europe. Because what are the crowned heads of Europe always found sponsoring? I get into this in the Philosopher's Stone. They're found sponsoring alchemy.
Oh, yes.
Okay?
Transmutation. Yeah.
Why are they the ones doing this?
That's an interesting question.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. Yeah. Now, this is a huge, huge thing that I'm suggesting. But the suggestion is made by the story and the question that you raise yourself. By raising the Tower of Babel and drawing the parallel to the modern period, you see the connection instantly.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And they're at two such removed poles in history.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a huge story. And everyone, I suspect, senses only the modern part of it. But there's a medieval part, and there's a classical part.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. There is nothing new
under the sun.
Right.
Well.
Yeah. And it's amazing how they keep this stuff under wraps.
Oh, yeah.
And go around deceiving people. We're being visited by aliens. And I think it's very possible.
Well, yeah,
that they could even create some kind of little robotic beings in laboratories.
Not only that, but there is the other side of this story. If you take those Middle Eastern texts seriously, and this is part of that component of Nazi belief that is so peculiar. Okay, to bring it to modern times and to make it relevant here. If you take those ancient texts seriously, particularly the ones from Mesopotamia, they are all full of the idea that at some point in the mists of human prehistory, the original human stock and a stock from elsewhere, let's just put it that way, but clearly off planet, became mixed. They were intermingled. So, this is the other nasty little part of this story that you have, of all people, the Germans picking up on in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and then it enters the mythology of the Nazi Party through the Thule-Gesellschaft, which, was a signal component of some of their belief. So,
Well, go ahead.
Well, the point is if there's ET out there, my suspicion is increasingly that they're, so to speak, genetic cousins.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the founder of that German Thule Society, Rudolf
von Bottendorf.
Yeah, Bottendorf. Good old Bottendorf. He discovered some very old texts, did he not?
Yes.
Dualists' rejection of El Shaddai.
Well, this is interesting that you mentioned that, and I mentioned it in the Nazi International. I think it's Nazi International. I've got so many books out now I can't keep them straight anymore. But I do mention it somewhere. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
Yeah, he was himself a bit of an amateur Assyriologist, and he went to the Middle East several times and supposedly was initiated into some secret society in Istanbul and all of this stuff. Well, he went to Iraq and he discovered a bunch of texts that, if you read between the lines of the quotation I have in the book very carefully, what he's actually discovered there is a text that seems to plug the biblical Old Testament God somewhere into the Sumerian pantheon. Okay? And on that basis, the Bottendorf concludes that the Old Testament God was not the father figure of Christianity, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay? And he comes back to Germany with this idea, and it becomes very much a part of the thinking of esoteric societies within Germany.
Oh, naturally.
Yeah. Well, it's not an old idea. There were early people in the early centuries of Christianity that thought very similar things. Marcionism and various forms of Gnosticism, Ptolemaic Gnosticism, and so on and so forth,
right,
that would say essentially the same thing. So it's not a new idea. But what's new is that Bottendorf is making the claim that he's found this on Assyrian tablets, which to me is extremely interesting. Even if he's making this up, it's a very interesting thing for him to have said, because what it means is he has seen the implication of what Delitzsch was saying in his Babel und Bibel lecture.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
In other words, okay, if this is true then, if this is heavily edited Sumerian mythology, okay, where then in the Sumerian pantheon does this Old Testament guy fit? Mm-hmm. And as you know, in the Cosmic War, I give you part of an answer based on the theophany of God to Moses at the burning bush. I am who I am. Well, in Hebrew, that's Ea Asher Ea. Okay? Well, Ea happens to be the West Akkadian name, which would have been very familiar to Abraham. That's where he's from. Is the West Akkadian name for the Babylonian or Sumerian god Enki.
Oh.
And that's the problem.
Yes.
You see, that's the real whopper.
Yeah, that's why we can't discuss these kind of things publicly. Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Okay, because you see, if anyone's a candidate for the Old Testament God, you would think it would be Anu, the Babylonian.
Anu,
Anu or the other one, Enlil, who's this god of rigid order, and everybody better have their papers, and that kind of guy.
Yeah.
But no, it turns out to be, of all things, Enki.
Oh my gosh.
So that's to make matters worse, Enki is a bit of a if you know your Norse mythology, he's kind of a Loki character. He's an imp. He's a constant troublemaker. He's a wizard, a sorcerer, you name it. This guy is into everything, So there's, the problems at that point really multiply. I mean, the theological ones, because clearly the Old Testament God is not in favor of those sorts of activities.
Right. True.
So it just gets so very, very convoluted. But, to me, that very convolution indicates that there's something going on back there with these myths and texts.
Yeah.
And one side or the other, possibly even both, have a heavy hand in editing things to their own benefit.
Good point. Yeah. Absolutely. Why? And, human nature, why not?
Human nature being human nature. Yeah, exactly.
Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
Although I think that they, capital They, are not like us.
Well, you've made that comment before, and the elite. Are not like us in the sense that they do not have the same sense of morality, if they have any at all.
Joseph, when was the last time you got up in the morning and decided to go over and take over your neighborhood?
Exactly.
And make everybody pay extortion money to you for protecting them, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, in that sense, no, they're not like us. They are pariahs, parasites, criminals, thugs. I have a picture of in one of my books of David Rockefeller. Bless this guy's heart. Here's this old, shriveled up, bitter man.
Yes.
Carrying all the heavy chains of all of his wealth and, running around the world and attending all these conspiracy meetings where they're going to bring in the New World Order.
Yeah.
And here he is. He's sitting at a table at a Bilderberg meeting, in fact, sipping soup, what appears to be soup. And he's looking directly in the camera with this I don't know how to describe it, just this scowl.
Yeah.
Just this heavy-laden, bitter scowl.
Yeah.
Okay? And, to me, that picture says it all. Because he's a miserable parasite, and he knows it.
You think he really knows it?
I think he really knows it. And at some point, he made the bargain that he was going to live with it.
He made a deal with the devil.
Yeah, he made a deal with the devil and with the baser parts of his own nature.
Yeah.
And, I have nothing but pity for him. Because in the end, he's going to die.
Well, of course.
And he can't take any of his schemes, any of his power, any of his money, any of these wonderful ideas he thinks are so brilliant with him.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And his legacy to humanity, at some point, I am a firm believer the truth inevitably out. The legacy, in spite of all the foundations and all the charitable grants, the legacy is going to be so colored and corrupted by the wickedness of their designs.
Yeah.
Okay? And I feel nothing but pity for him. That's the worst thing. The devil, I forget who it was. I think it was John Donne. The devil is a proud spirit and cannot bear to be mocked.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do to these people is laugh at them.
Yes.
And shun them, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
They are nothing but a criminal parasite class.
Yeah.
They may be perfectly legal, but that, to my mind, legality being what it is these days, that's not much of a. That's not saying much. That's not saying much. No.
Yeah.
So and I feel nothing but pity for them. That doesn't mean that I ascribe to any sort of goodwill for their plans. I certainly don't. But, you see these people and the heaviness that they carry with them. I mean, my word, look at Henry Kissinger.
Oh, Lord, yeah.
This man is bloated and fat.
Yeah.
And,
short.
And short and so power hungry.
Yes.
And ultimately, he can't take any of it with him.
Yeah, that's right.
So, it's all in vain in a certain sense. Because they have done nothing to improve the common lot of humanity.
Yeah.
This is the crime, ultimately, that I think is in play here. If you want to talk spirituality, that's it.
Yes.
Because they don't have a
compassion.
Well, precisely. They don't have humanity.
Yeah.
It's all their group study projects and position papers and this and that and the other. And they are so consumed with it that this is all they know.
Yeah.
And, imagine not being able to really enjoy the beauty of the world or the joy of doing something kind and decent for it or for your neighbor.
That's right.
I really, really do pity these people because they have to live around a cordon of security constantly. They are in prisons of an unbelievable making.
Is that because they are so hated? Or?
Yeah, of course they are.
Okay. Yeah.
Of course they are. They are. Well, just stop and think of your average listener to this program. How do you think they would feel suddenly being in the company of people like that? Would they want to be? I don't want to be.
No, I wouldn't either.
No, of course not. They are quite literally shunned.
Yeah.
And that's another shame. At some point, another one of my favorite pictures, I have a picture of J. Pierpont Morgan.
Yes.
In his top hat with his cane, okay? And they caught him in a very frank moment when he was being himself.
Yeah. He's
turned around facing the reporter's camera with this look of absolute hatred.
Oh.
And he's actually having to be physically restrained by someone else because he looks like he's about ready to charge the reporter and club him to death with his cane. Okay?
Yeah.
In other words, this man is so full of his own sense of superiority and so full of vanity and so full of hate, he cannot even bear to have his picture taken without permission.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. And to me, when you get to that point, if that's all your power and money can do for you,
then
it's not.
You're reprobate.
Yeah, you're a reprobate. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, with this space program, the public one, the private one,
right?
I can't help but wonder, Joseph, who they do a lot of tests,
right,
in space, like with germs and viruses, and they say that when they bring them back, that they are more dangerous, because they're more virulent. Why? Everything is about death, killing, genocide. The Nazis have got to have control of that.
Well, I don't know who is running this country's private program right now. I mean, who's really in control of it?
Right.
Okay. I suspect which agencies are running it, but that doesn't mean who's controlling it.
Right.
I don't know about Europe. I certainly can't speculate about Russia or China or India or anybody else that has anything like a space program. But, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month, I don't know, sometime in that time frame, the Chinese government pointed out that they had grown some tomatoes, just gigantic tomatoes. I mean, these things are as big as beanbag chairs.
Oh, my God.
From seeds that they had brought back from space, and they were looking into this as an idea of increasing their food supply. Okay? So, yeah, space does seem to have some peculiar effects on things. And, if you take that and take the whole Hoagland-Barrow line, that there's technology up there that they're scrambling to get back to, it appears that whoever is in control of these private space programs, and I think there's more than one. In other words, again, we have an indication of some factional infighting going on. Because, China and Japan have very publicly said they're going to the moon.
Yes.
And Russia and India are saying, well, we're going to too.
Yeah.
And they're talking publicly, and we're going to do this on rockets. Who knows what they're planning privately.
Yeah.
But in other words, that to me is another sign that no, we're not content to let the Anglo-American elite or whoever's running the American program get back there and monopolize it for themselves. So this whole factional infighting thing has now moved off the globe and into outer space.
And God help us.
Exactly.
the thought that they can have control of things from outer space, that is very spooky.
Very, very.
Yeah.
Because who knows exactly what's up there.
Yeah, well, I think there's something up there. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, well, you've read Cosmic War. You know what I think is possibly up in some of those places.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, Joseph. I agree with you. It's just, I just pray to God that they don't have absolute control of it,
Well, control is a funny thing. It has a tendency, the more absolute it gets, the more it slips through your fingers. There's no way to predicting these things, but this seems to be an inevitability of people that want to attempt to do those types of things.
Yeah.
That it seems to slip away from them the very instant they get it.
Very interesting. Well, Joseph, tell people how they can get a hold of Nazi International. This is one fantastic book. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's quite a read once you get done with it.
Oh my gosh.
He's just kind of stunned,
Have you connected the dots or what? We're going to have to take up a collection to put armed protection around you.
Well, I hope it doesn't come to that. It certainly gives me pause sometimes.
I know.
Some of the emails that are beginning to crawl out of the woodwork and be sent my way. But anyway, the book they can get directly from the publisher, which is Adventures Unlimited Press.
Right.
And the number is 1-800-718-4514 during normal business hours. I think the price on this book is $19.95. I'm not certain. They can go to the publisher's website and check on it, or they can go to the Barnes and Noble or Borders and find out, order it from them, or Amazon, of course, has it. I think Amazon actually only has one in stock the last time I checked, so apparently they've sold out rather quickly.
Well, Joseph, the cover.
Yes.
The symbol, explain that.
The cover itself is a black cover.
Yes.
With predominantly red and white lettering. Mm-hmm. And, of course, black, red, and white are the Nazi Party flag symbols, the colors. But the cover of the book has a swastika on it. Yeah. And it's enclosed in a circle.
Yes.
With runes and so on and so forth. Well, that circle is actually the design of the SS ring that was given by Heinrich Himmler to top officers, usually of general rank or above, inside of the SS. So, the symbology there is that the basic outlines of the Nazi International were centered around the tip of power within the SS, and specifically three individuals that I talk about in the book. But that's the symbolism of that particular cover.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, there is more information in this book than you want to know.
Yeah, that's kind of a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I'm serious. It's like being on the inside of the CIA or something.
Well, yeah, and one of the biggest things for me in that book was to cover the German reunification and tell the story about it that most people, especially in North America, haven't heard.
Right.
And I warn people, I'm not trying to paint the Germans out as these bad and evil people. That's not my point.
It's not the people.
It's not the people. It's the people orchestrating the events that led to the reunification. That's a whole different group.
Yeah.
And it's very, very scary when you see how it happened and who was behind it and driving it, and then the subsequent moves of Germany on the foreign policy stage, which most people don't realize that was Germany's doing,
Yeah. And then isn't it just fascinating, Joseph, that this person that's alleged to be a president-elect of this country gave a speech over there in a certain place?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I have a running debate with a certain very famous individual within the alternative research field who views all the symbolism there as wonderful. This is the surest sign that all those nasty old things are dead and gone. The fact that someone like that would be there doing that kind of speech. Well, No, I take the opposite view.
I do too.
That, if you put it into the context of the people driving the German reunification, if you put it into the context of the just breathtaking replays
yes.
of history that Germany did after the reunification inside of Europe, and really see what's going on, and we didn't even talk about that tonight, but once you see it and just recall the facts of pre-World War II history, your jaw just kind of drops, because it's just too uncanny for words, and it's certainly not coincidental. But you put all of that history and then that symbolism of him going there and doing that speech. And what I point out to people that most people don't realize is that, if I remember correctly, he gave that speech close to the Brandenburg Gate on the old Siegesallee, the Avenue of Victory in Berlin. Mm-hmm. And if you go back to 1939, that very same huge boulevard was the scene of Adolf Hitler's 50th birthday celebration, which of course was this gigantic military parade that went on for hours and hours. Yeah. And Hitler's sitting there in the review stand reviewing his troops, goose-stepping by. Well, the symbolism to me is not good.
No, it's not
because what it indicates to me is that the people who may be calling the shots, again, are some people in Europe with some extremely unsavory backgrounds. And again, to me, it's a little indicator that factional infighting, imagine a president-elect having to go there, of all places.
Yes.
To win popularity. Why not Moscow? Why not, which
Why
would be
not
or China, which are the logical places. Why does he have to be vetted there?
Very interesting. And people should really think about that. And it's also very interesting to discover that the head of Germany is a physicist.
Yeah, ain't it just? Ain't it just?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and she's the first. What's interesting to me, Georgianne, is she is the first Christian Democratic Union chancellor since Chancellor Kohl.
Yeah.
Okay? So in other words, why a physicist of all people? What's she doing in politics?
Yeah, since when is a physicist a politician?
Yeah, exactly. A PhD, no less,
Yeah.
And I don't know if your people know it. Getting a PhD in Germany is not like getting one here or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah,
it's just a horrendously difficult process.
Yeah, you got $5.95. You can buy one here.
yeah, that's sad but true. But over there, it's just a monstrously difficult process.
Well, it's your whole life.
Yeah, it really is. And why someone like that should come to the fore of one of the major political parties in that country is anyone's guess. And especially a woman.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just so against the grain.
Your fatherland is run by the mama.
Exactly. So it just kind of makes you wonder what really is going on. But part of that story certainly is told in the Nazi International with the chapter that I devote to the German reunification. Because
Joseph, it'll make people's hair catch on fire.
Yeah, it really will.
When they read this.
It's just really hair raising,
Oh, yeah.
And I sent you that little YouTube thing of the German army on parade,
Yeah.
And if that, you put that in the context of the events around the reunification, and you begin to get some very bad feelings in the pit of your stomach.
Oh yes. and who knows what's to come? I'm sure it won't be happiness.
Well, I certainly hope that's not the case. And
well, we can hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Joseph, God bless you.
You too, honey.
Mightily for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. Prayers on this new book because this one's a whopper.
You mean more than Nazi International?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, Nazi International is a series.
Yeah, it's part of a series.
Well, I mean, for the Byte show.
Oh yeah.
We've got much more to talk about.
Oh yes, there's tons of stuff in that book.
Yeah.
Most of it hair raising, as you say.
Yeah, well, I'm serious. It will make people's hair catch fire when they read this.
Yeah, it does.
It really connects the dots, Joseph.
Yeah, it really does. And the thing about writing it is, I had trouble sleeping, sometimes when I was writing it. It's just the implications of it are just nothing less than really, when you get right down to it, horrifying.
Exactly.
Because it's...
when they say war between good and evil, they do mean it.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And people, I've said this so many times, Joseph, the average person has problems wrapping their mind around the magnitude of evil that we are facing and have, it's... I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. That's what I'm trying to do, really, with some of these books, is provide a historical perspective on that and provide a context, to absorb the hugeness of it all.
Right.
Because it really is breathtaking. It really is.
It'll give you asthma.
Yeah, that too.
Oh, gee. Oh, golly, Joseph. Everybody, please go to Joseph's website, Gaza, Giza, that's right. Well, Yola, tongue-tied. Giza, Giza, deathstar.com. And once again, I remind you, the listener, that there is a PayPal button on Joseph P. Farrell's website. I would expect that you make use of that PayPal button. We need to support this man in his work. The magnitude of research that he does and the books that he has turned out is just, this is truly end time material. Joseph, it tells us how we got here, why things are the way they are, and who's making them that way.
Yeah.
You're not going to find this kind of material anywhere else. Joseph P. Farrell is to be, I'll tell you what, Joseph, you should be nominated as a national treasure. That says it all. Oh, I didn't know I was so funny.
Well, it is kind of humorous. The first thing that pops into my mind is Nicolas Cage movies.
Oh. Oh, my goodness. Well, on that note, if you want to email Joseph P. Farrell, go to the Byte Show, go to the library, click on Joseph's name. His page opens up with all these audio files that we have archived, and his email address is there, his website, everything. So you can email him at Vardas, V is in Victor, ARDAS 3, the number 3, at AOL.com. And once again, make use of the PayPal button at GizaDeathStar.com. Let's keep Joseph afloat here. And we will be back. Joseph, don't you think this warrants a series?
Yeah, this probably is a separate series in and unto itself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Dirty secrets.
Yeah, dirty secrets. I like that.
That'll be the name of our new series. Dirty secrets.
I like it.
Well, God bless everybody listening. We are going to turn it off now.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, Georgia.
You're welcome.